In this video, Chris Gardner takes us through his study comparing major diets. Summary slides will be provided in the end.
And we really got a lot of people in this study, which we called the A to Z study. So if you call the Learn manual by Kelly Brownell the traditional health professionals approach, you come up with A to Z, which is the spectrum of really low carb to really high carb. So Atkins anchors the bottom, Ornish anchors the top. Zone's 40% carb, and the Learn is the health professionals approach. That's about 60% carb. The way we did this, we didn't get 20 or 50. We got 311 local folks, all women, all premenopausal women, which I can go into later if you want to ask me why, but not at the moment. They got these 8 weeks of classes. They had to read an eighth of the book each week. We wanted to see, once they knew the books, how well could they stick with them on their own? So here's what they said their beginning diet was before they started the study. High fat, kind of low carb diet, not really low carb. So this is exactly where you would have room for improvement. You could lower your fat and increase your carb and follow the national guidelines. Okay, so here's what we got. We actually collected over 3,000 days of records from the women in the study. And if you broke it down into what proportion of carb, fat, and protein, those little pie charts represent the huge spread we got. In fact, at 8 weeks, every group was different than every other group, not just in carbohydrate, but also in fat and also in protein, which is an important thing to remember, because when you eat a low-carb diet, you don't just get low carb, you get more protein and more fat. So you can't just say if you get an effect that it's due to low carb. You have to assume that it may be due to some of the other things. Okay, so remember, then we stopped. No more help after that. And look what happens at 6 months. So our top two pie charts here look just like Bonnie Bream's. So they got down to 17% carb, but they really couldn't do it on their own. They bopped back up to 30% carb. And this is intriguing. Dean Ornish is really mad at me for this study, okay? His diet is 10% fat. Even with a dietitian and 8 weeks of help, they only got to 20% fat. And 6 months later, they were already back to 29. We still have a continuum there. And then whatever they got at 6 months, they did pretty well. They kind of held out to a year. So you can see they didn't lose much ground between 6 months and a year. So we were pretty happy with that. And we actually still have a big spread, especially if you look at the extremes. So we're 52% carb and 32% carb. That's what some studies start out at as a goal. And they don't quite get there. And then they lose it over time. And they're very close at the end. So after a year, we actually had a pretty big spread here. All right, now this was interesting because Atkins and Ornish say eat all you want. If you just really get rid of your carb and you really get rid of your fat, you won't have to count calories at all. You'll just eat less. Whereas Zone and Learn really had very specific guidelines for how many calories. So I was really interested to see that when we added up the calories, they all said they cut back the same number. And none of them differed at any time point in all 4 groups. Now, to be honest, if they had really cut back that many calories, all 4 groups would have lost 40 pounds, and they didn't. So they exaggerated how many calories they cut back on. But like I said, I'm assuming that they consistently underestimated the same way. So I'm intrigued to see that they all seem to say they're eating the same number of calories, even though some get very specific criteria for cutting back. And some say eat as much as you want. In fact, Dean Ornish's book says eat more, weigh less. Just eat as much as you want until you're full. This is what we found in our study. Well, you have to look at this because it's up in front of you, but take your eyes away from that just for a minute. This is one of the things we're the most proud of. A year later, we had 80% retention in our study of 311 women, which actually isn't perfect for sure. But it far outdoes anybody else who's ever published this before. They usually have 50%, 60% retention. Sometimes that's at 6 months. This was at 12 months. Okay, so you can see at 6 months, Atkins, actually these are highly statistically significant. And by the time you get here and you do the appropriate thing, which is to adjust for multiple testing, the only real difference is Atkins versus Zone. But my simple take-home message for one is that all 3 of the other diets were almost identical. And if anything stuck out, it was the lower carb diet. Now picture this isn't really the Atkins diet as it says in the book. It's higher carbohydrate. And to be honest, it's a Palo Alto Atkins diet. You know, I think it's an educated, premenopausal woman in California diet. So I don't think it was all steak and whipped cream like he says, right? Another thing to notice is these women had 30 to 100 pounds to lose. And You can see they were losing 6% of their body weight, 2, 3, 4% of their body weight. Overall, it wasn't really a big loss on average, but I'm going to show you another slide to show you how variable that was. So you can't say this is fabulous, this is the end of the obesity epidemic, everybody should be on the low-carb diet. It worked a little better, but nobody really lost. On average, none of the diets did fantastically well, which is really what we thought in the beginning. We just didn't have enough data to show it. Okay, so now let me show you some other tweaks to this. So for one thing, losing weight isn't what it's all about. It's your health getting better. So we looked at some other things, and everybody said, oh, on that Atkins diet, you might lose weight, but your health is going to go to hell. Oh, your cholesterol is going to go through the roof, et cetera. So we compared all the diets for different things. So here's all the things that were statistically significant, and every one of these actually favored Atkins over one or more of the other groups. There was no group that did better than Atkins in anything. Not cholesterol, not blood pressure, not insulin, not glucose. Maybe some things we didn't measure, but of the classic risk factors that people were worried about, nothing got worse. They did a little better than the other folks. And then if you compare the other three diets to themselves, there were absolutely no differences, but that makes sense because you could see how they all tracked for weight.